Hey, man, are you sure you got enough?
You can never have enough, brother.
Welcome back, Maverick Gamers. Yep, it's me, Dwayne. I'm real. I'm not an AI this week. Just getting over a really rough patch. I had a bad sickness there that robbed me of my voice, so thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a week off and let you absorb some of my non-verbal content, as it were. But I'm back, and I've got some things to talk about. Now, most of you know that I'm a old school gamer, turning 50 years old this year, and obviously don't have a lack of things to say about the hobby that we all know and love. When it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, I've got lots to say, most of which is not very popular, especially considering that the majority of the people I interact with are younger gamers and are still new to the hobby, so to speak. So when an old guy like me comes into the room and starts barking off about how the game's broken and how you need to fix things or do things differently, you can guess it doesn't really land well. Today we're going to be talking about something that really bothers me, and it's been bothering me for a long time, so I thought I'd make a video about it. Being an old school gamer of Dungeons & Dragons means there were certain rules in place back then that aren't in place now, or that they've gone and created rules for that have changed sort of how I played D&D. Now, being open-minded, I always take these things in stride, but there's been one thing that's been bothering me ever since I picked up my rulebooks and started playing full-time, and that is the amount of equipment that players seem to be walking around with in current games of D&D. Let's dive into it.
Are you sure, Dwayne? I am more than happy
it's
to keep
okay,
filling
Kate.
in for
It's
you
okay.
while you
I've
were
got
unwell.
it. I'm feeling totally fine now. I really appreciate you standing in for me last week. Thanks. Now, it goes without saying that every single D&D group is not the same, and a lot of dungeon masters out there might not be afflicted with the same type of players that I am. But I'm going to walk you through what my scenarios are typically when it comes to adventurers. Adventurers are pack rats, plain and simple. If you're playing a game that involves gold pieces, or treasure hunting, so to speak, it's natural that players are going to start looking at everything in their environment and everything you describe to them as a way of procuring said gold. In my situation, what ends up happening is I have players who seem to think that every time they slay an enemy or defeat a monster, that it's in their best interest to take whatever possessions that monster had along with them, even though that player may have exactly the same items in their possession that the monsters already did. Point in case, weapons. After slaying a group of goblins, they see short swords, daggers, bows, whatever the case may be, and most of my players that I've experienced with tend to want to just take all of those items and bring them along for the ride. The reason for doing so? Well, we're going to sell them when we get back to town. Or, better yet, you can never have too many swords, right? Got me thinking, a long time actually, and there is a very dedicated system in the game that revolves around Encumbrance. So a lot of dungeon masters I speak to automatically point to the Encumbrance system, saying, well, hey, if they can carry it with their physical strength, they can carry it. But then I start looking at it from a different point of view. Dungeons & Dragons, to me, has often been very similar to a camping trip. You pack what you need, and you go on this exciting adventure. As a kid, that was sort of the fantasy that I had when playing D&D, is that you were alone, you were an adult, you were grown up, and you had to assemble your camping gear to go play Dungeons & Dragons. As a fighter, you would go to the shop, you would buy your sword, your armor, your shield, your backpack, and you're out of gold. Or at least that's how it went in most of my games. The sheer value of gold back when I played Dungeons & Dragons was immense. It allowed you to buy that one extra item that you think might come in handy on your next adventure. There was literally an adventure where we were playing and we didn't have rope because no one bought the rope. In addition to having all the items they could ever want right at the beginning of the game, they also have the ability to carry as much as they want. Now, of course, the encumbrance rules obviously are going to prohibit a certain amount of that, but just in the mock-up that I created prior to filming this video, I took a fighter of mine and loaded him up with about 7 short swords, 5 long bows, and about 5 daggers. Yeah, totally within his encumbrance, but there's a greater discussion that needs to be had here, and a lot of dungeon masters don't want to talk about it because it gets a little bit too micromanagey. But I think we need to talk about it. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can actually tackle this. We can really dive in and start creating all sorts of meta rules and different grids and really strip apart how much a character can carry in terms of weapons and equipment. But let's just focus on the weapons for a second, because I think encumbrance will take care of the actual weight and the standard equipment like bedrolls, wine skins, water skins, rations, etc. What I want to talk about here is how many weapons can a character carry on their body without it actually becoming just ludicrous. So the common sense system in my mind would be that a player at the beginning of the game when they create it is basically going to pick a primary weapon. Now D&D Beyond does a good job in this, and when you actually choose starting equipment, gives you an alternative of this weapon or that weapon. So allow that process to play out. When you look at what it really does give you, is it does give you a primary weapon, a secondary weapon, and it gives you a ranged weapon. So D&D Beyond is really on point at that. Now, the real problem comes in the adventuring days, the days after you create your character. I think that rule should still be in place. I think as a dungeon master, you should say to the player, what is your primary weapon, what is your secondary weapon, and what is your ranged weapon? If a player comes across another primary type weapon that he just feels the need to carry on him for that occasion when he might need to pull out some extra heavy artillery, just let him know that he needs to sacrifice something on his body. Talk to them about the reality of wandering through a dungeon with a couple of long swords strapped to his back, as well as a battle axe, a couple short swords, a few daggers here and there, in addition to his backpack and other items he's carrying.
Oh, Jesus. My nuts!
Let that sink in for a second and say, yes, we do have rules that allow you to carry all of that, but when it comes down to common sense, it's going to be likely that you're going to be jingling and jangling and rubbing up against stuff in the dungeon, let alone trying to pull one of these weapons out at a moment's notice. My rule would be just simply a common sense rule. Say to the player, what you started with is what you get to keep. So if you are wanting to replace your primary weapon, go ahead, do so. If you want to add another primary weapon to your arsenal, go ahead and do so. But know that that's going to take up a little bit more room on your body, a little bit more inconvenience, so you might have to sacrifice your secondary weapon. If they want to sacrifice a ranged weapon, go ahead. They can add another primary weapon to it. So essentially what you're doing is you're dealing with 3 slots on the character. You're dealing with their primary, their secondary, and their ranged weapon slots. You're just doing it in a way that it doesn't seem so mathematical and so stat-keepy. Working within the confines of common sense is probably something you don't do a lot in Dungeons and Dragons because after all, it is a game, and games are meant to be manipulated and used to your advantage. But in this situation, I think having a common sense rule as opposed to a set dedicated rule is probably the better way to handle this, considering that you're going to have players who are going to fight you tooth and nail to demand that they be able to carry as much equipment as they want to carry as long as it doesn't exceed their encumbrance. I think using a little common sense is probably the best way to go.
Sometimes I think Dwayne talks too much. Besides, I am more knowledgeable than he is on the topic of Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you are all having fun playing D&D. I will be seeing you very soon.
Before you go, I need your help. I'm trying to grow the exposure of what we do here at Maverick Games. My goal is to actually bring information to parents and students around the world in hopes that they can see gaming as a path forward for learning, academics, and even support of neurodivergency. Please subscribe. Make sure you click on those notifications, and I hope that you'll find content here that will be helpful for you and maybe others. Thank you very much, and thanks for tuning in.